Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. Later, searching for oil around the globe. But first, let's take a look at the local media scene, and I want to take a look at public broadcasting. You read them all the time in Westword. Michael Roberts, thank you for being here.
Thank you for asking.
How long have you been covering the media beat? I mean, you have, there's so, I don't know of anybody else in local media that covers local media, because reporters do not like to have any attention.
Oh, we've found that out over the years.
I mean, to the point that I'm amazed how sensitive reporters are, who love to pile on politicians and activists and really, but when they're getting some sunlight, they hate it. Have you found the same thing?
Oh, I absolutely found
Why
the
is
same
that?
thing. Well, I sympathize. You know, when the questions are turned around, we're just not accustomed to dealing with it, and so it's an awkward situation. Every word that comes out of our mouth, we think about how it's going to look in print, and it's always going to look worse than if we'd written it ourselves. So it's something that has been a constant since I started writing about the media, and I started a media column at Westword in 1999, so it's been a while now.
Wow. Yeah, nobody likes you.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, it's terrific. It's a great column. I devour it all the time. Getting back to reporters being the subject of a story, and I'm not talking one that's going through a crisis or got caught doing a crime, but just saying, hey, you're doing this. Why is that the right way to report it? They get very defensive. Is there part of them that then becomes sympathetic, where it says, oh, that's what this feels like? And they read the paper. I mean, I get quoted often enough, and so often it's not right. It can even not in any sort of on purpose way, but it's just not right. And you go, I didn't say that. Do you get more sympathy that way? I mean, does a reporter get more sympathetic to the people they're reporting on?
If you're asking, are they more sympathetic to their readers and viewers if they're talking to us as real people, I strongly believe that they do. It's important for reporters who expect communication and transparency from their sources to be communicative and transparent when they're speaking, but it's for some people difficult.
But they can't handle criticism.
There's a lot of that.
Yeah.
That's definitely the case. There are also people who enjoy the give and take, and
right.
Not to suck up to the host, but you're one of those people.
But I'm not a reporter. I'm a commentator. I mean, so I get very used to people saying nasty things about me. If they don't, what am I good for? But other reporters, they're supposed to be reporters, as if they're not supposed to have an opinion. But they all have opinions, and it usually seeps through the reporting, but I don't think they see it.
Oh, I think that those kinds of questions make people uncomfortable, but we are in a changing media environment. Back in the day, it was all, I'm completely objective, I don't bring any baggage, I have no personal viewpoint, I'm utterly neutral, and there are still news agencies that toe that line.
Which is
but
a
there
fib.
are others are, advocacy journalism or coming out and saying, this is my point of view in this particular article, is a thing today.
Well, I mean, I'll take a look at, for instance, the Colorado Independent. These are some of my favorite commies in the world, and they wear it there. We are leftists. We're going to do left-leaning reporting, and Susie Green and Litwin, these are friends of mine, and I appreciate that they're up front. I've been in somewhat of a public spat, and you wrote about it, with Colorado Public Radio, in that I believe, and I don't think they've ever understood this, I value Colorado Public Radio. I think they are could become the newspaper of record for Colorado. As newspapers dwindle, they actually put resources into local reporting and local political reporting. Newspapers aren't even doing this anymore. And they deliver it right into your car when you're driving, and it's huge. And I love this. I love them. They're great. But I can't stand how left-leaning their coverage is, and I'm convinced they are completely blind to it. And because it's audio, when you do something in print, it's one thing. And you can see it, and you see the bias. But in radio, you hide it in different ways with sound effects. And when you use somebody's actual voice, couple weeks back, they had Cory Gardner had a audio town hall, was on the telephone town hall, and they put on the audio of a impaired vet who obviously came back and wanted more health care. And he had a very sympathetic voice. And they gave a nice long cut of that, but didn't give any time to Cory Gardner, and just said, and the senator responded like this, and approximately. It's like, do you not see what you're doing when you do these little things? My favorite, of course, is when they label left-leaning groups as non-profit, non-partisan research outfit, whatever, which basically says, we're giving it a thumbs up. This is, you can trust these guys. Other groups like Independence Institute, the conservative, right-wing leaning, free market, which is fine. That's a good. But I'm frustrated with it. Why did you decide to pick this up?
Well, for me, I think that these are interesting questions to ask and to dig into because, as you suggest, these are opinions that people have, and whether they want to admit them or not, they can come through in subtle ways. In our conversation for our piece in Westword, one of the things that you said that really rings true to me is the idea that having somebody else in the room with a different ideological viewpoint may lead to different stories. And I think that's really key. For me, even though, as we were joking before we started taping, people regard Westword as a Maoist publication, I very much enjoy writing about politicians of every type, and I think it's important that we just give them a platform and allow them to speak and let the reader decide what they think. Today, actually Thursday, we ran a long Q&A with Steve Barlock, the former co-chairman of Denver for Trump, who's running for governor. And there, basically is a transcript of our conversation where I let him talk at great length. I'm thinking that we're probably not going to hear that on Colorado Public Radio. And it would be good if we could have them reach out to different people, different sources, have different kinds of stories than just sort of the predictable public radio stories.
And they can say, hey, we're being objective and what we're reporting is correct, but the bias is usually in story selection.
Right, I think that's key.
Especially I think about environmental stories. A story about an arts reporter doing a story on a piece that shows the post-climate change Holocaust, and you go through it and how it chilled him to the bone. And you're rolling your eyes going, really, this is balance. When there is balance, it's usually in a debate format. Well, I find that fact-checking, people on the right seem to get fact-checked more at CPR than on the left. These are great people. They really are, but they're living in a bubble. For this show, we used to repeatedly ask to get their political reporters on because reporters make great guests. They're smart, they're funny. I'd love to have Megan Verley on. She's a hoot. Sandra Fish is terrific, but they're not allowed to come on. They are forced into their bubble, not to be challenged in any way, shape, or form, or even to give their opinions, which we know they have. Why do you think this is?
I'm puzzled about it. I think it's short-sighted. I think it's important for those of us who are in this kind of a setting to come out and talk to whoever wants to talk to us. And perhaps they don't want to give a particular political opinion on something that they're writing about, and that I understand. You want the reader to you make up their own mind rather than to come to it and have to filter through a bunch of things. But talk, be accessible. It's important. We as members of the media are out there trying to get other people to talk. Why can't we? I don't understand what we get by suddenly putting up a wall and saying, well, we won't talk to anybody or won't talk to somebody from this political perspective. It's puzzling. I've
been trying to get granted an audience with the good folks at CPR. It looked like I was going to get somewhere, but they won't meet with me. My simple thought is, if you guys were to do as great a job on diversity when it comes to races and sexual identity, do that on the ideological side, there are a bunch of us who want to listen to public radio. I shouldn't be the only Republican in all Colorado that listens to CPR. We want to do this. It's commercial free. It's professional.
There may be others,
it's great.
but they're probably in the closet.
They are definitely in the closet. You had a similar thing. You tried to get hold of the of CPR as well.
I just reached out to Kelly Griffin, who is the person in charge of the news operation over there, and she did not directly get back to me. She had her communications director get back to me, and the communications director had a conversation.
They have a communications director?
They do.
They're a newspaper.
Just like the Politburo. So anyway, she asked me what questions I was going to ask, even though I had kind of described in an email what questions I was interested in asking. And so I re-described the questions that I was going to ask, and she said, we'll get back to you. And then a day or so later, there was an email saying that they had chatted and decided that their response to your original column in the Denver Post covered the subject adequately, and there was no reason to go into it again. So I remember using the phrase with her, I would like to talk to her because in conversation, interesting topics can come up and we can go in different directions.
Which is how CPR and public radio works. They have these
have
long conversations.
shows with people who are doing just that.
Right.
So again, the specter of hypocrisy of news organizations that want politicians and other newsmakers to talk to them, but suddenly when they're asked to talk are allergic to doing so, strikes me as problematic.
It's frustrating. It really is, because I hear through their very sanctimonious promos that they go about how curious they are and how much they want to have a discussion with this community that they're serving. And so they listen to their listener insight network, which are only people who live in that bubble, because they're NPR listeners, and they don't want to step outside and get challenged. And it's too bad. The problem with people like you from Westword is you don't shut up. The problem with CPR is they won't speak to anybody. They are protected down in the Bridges building, this mammoth fortress outside of Denver, and I want them to succeed. And for me, succeeding means having some real ideological diversity, having some different story selection. Every story at CPR seems to have the same bias that there's a governmental response. Either government didn't do their job right, or government isn't doing the job they could be doing. I mean, there's not. We've pitched so many stories on private sector schools, for instance. We've gotten nothing, and it's frustrating, because I think they're a jewel, a real value for the state of Colorado.
Well, I praise media organizations that will actually answer those kinds of questions that we're talking about here. Back in the day, Rocky Mountain News editor John Temple would not speak to me.
Really?
And I would call him almost on a daily basis. I'm surprised I didn't get a restraining order put out against me. And yet finally I cracked him, and he began speaking to me, and he turned out to be an incredibly forthright, smart, self-critical, very interesting person. And
I would be surprised that he wouldn't talk to you. He doesn't seem like that kind of guy.
Yeah, well, and he ended up not being that kind of guy. There are people who bring to the idea of speaking to Westword a certain assumption that we're going to come from a different angle. And I'd like to think that, I've done profiles of Tom Tancredo and a whole bunch of people who are to the right of the mean, and I have never heard from any of them that they felt that they were being treated unfairly.
I mean, Westword,
so
you're all perverts and weed dealers. But other than that, you've got guys like Alan Pendergast, who one of the few guys that makes good long-form journalism in politics. It's a value, and Westword is accessible. Every newspaper reporter I've ever talked to is accessible. We can fight the editors we fight with, and we get CPR and it's no wonder when I keep thinking about why they're in this bubble of and don't see how their coverage is so slanted. When you realize that they don't even communicate with people who feel differently, it's not a wonder.
Yeah. am a film fan and recently read a biography of Pauline Kael, famous film critic from The New Yorker. She said at one point she'd never met a person who had voted for Richard Nixon. And when you come from that perspective where you just don't know anybody who has a different point of view, it can certainly be limiting for you.
Well, maybe you'll have better luck trying to pop that bubble than I have, because I'd love to see it. Hey, thank you. Love your work, Westword. Stay tuned.